This story is about a brutal expedition on a high-gravity moon, where two brothers, Jackson and Eli, are buried deep in unstable crystal caverns searching for rare minerals. When a catastrophic cave-in leaves Eli crushed beneath a 500 kg beam, an alien medic declares him dead on the spot. But Jackson refuses to let go. The gravity on Thalos 9 was brutal. Every step was like pushing through wet concrete. Jackson could feel his muscles fighting with each movement, but he never complained. He had trained for this, conditioned his body for months, just for a shot at joining this joint expedition. And when he found out Eli, his younger brother, would be on the same team, he doubled down. It was a high-gravity moon orbiting a dead planet, known for its unstable subterranean crystal caverns and the rare mineral beryllium, something both the humans and the alien Laquari needed desperately. So, rather than forget the pain of life, we forgot about how the SS Park's life functioned as we knew. Eli walked ahead, his exosuit humming as it redistributed pressure around his knees. Unlike Jackson, Eli had gone in as a scientist, less muscle, more brain. But that didn't mean he was soft. He was agile, precise, and impossibly calm under pressure. The team's Laquari guide, a gray-scaled being named Vorel, clicked his sharp knuckles as he studied the scanner in his hands. "We're close," Vorel said, his slitted eyes narrowing at the readings. "Michael Isley, 2 more chambers." Jackson adjusted the strap on his oxygen pack and nodded. "Let's keep moving." The caverns sparkled unnaturally, refracting their helmet lights in odd, disorienting ways. Columns of jagged crystal jutted from the floor and ceiling like frozen lightning bolts. The mineral deposits they were here for glowed faintly blue. It was beautiful. And unstable. They had just stepped into the 6th chamber when the tremor hit. It started as a low vibration underfoot, the kind that made your teeth buzz. Jackson paused, holding up a hand. Eli froze. Vorel spun, alarmed. Then the world shifted. A roar like a collapsing skyscraper swallowed their shouts. Crystals rained from above. A beam, a support structure left by a previous dig team, snapped and plummeted from the ceiling like a guillotine, tups spilling out into the starless sky. Jackson paused, holding up a hand to stop his wrist. Captain Fox let out a small gas, colored blood. Jackson dove right. Vorel darted left. Eli wasn't fast enough. The beam, easily over 500 kilograms, slammed into his back and thighs, pinning him hard against the jagged crystal floor. Dust choked the air. Jackson scrambled up, coughed hard, then froze as he heard Vorel shout something. The sound shook Forgel's bones, not once, but several times, to produce just under 200 feet of sailing depth. "Stay down! Secondary tremors! No!" Jackson snarled, shoving debris aside. He could see Eli, his arm twitching, blood trailing from his helmet joint. "Eli!" Vorel was already scanning with his medical instrument, the end glowing with a pale yellow light. His brows furrowed. He leaned in close, checking vitals. After a second, the glow dimmed. Vorel looked up. "Leave him. He's dead." The words hit Jackson like a slap. He blinked, not believing it. He looked again at Eli's body. There was no obvious movement, no response. "Blood, yes, but no, he's not," Jackson shouted. Vorel didn't flinch. "There is no detectable pulse. Massive internal trauma, spinal breach likely. We need to evacuate before more debris." Jackson didn't hear the rest. He surged forward like a madman, falling to his knees beside Eli. He tried to wedge his fingers under the beam, but it didn't budge. Pain shot up his shoulders. He adjusted, wrapping his arms under the edge, knees trembling. "Eli! Damn it, come on!" Something tore in his side. The pain was immediate, searing, but he didn't let go. Muscles screamed. His vision darkened at the edges. His mouth opened in a soundless yell. His arms convulsed. For a second, he thought he'd black out. But the beam moved. An inch. 2, and with a final howl that shredded his throat, Jackson pulled. Eli's body slipped out just enough. Jackson collapsed onto his side, arm still under the beam. Blood pooled around his forearm where jagged metal had ripped it open. He didn't feel it. His ears were ringing too hard. Everything spun. Then hands were on him. Laquari medics rushed in, pulled Eli away. Another team lifted Jackson gently, stabilizing his arm, checking his pupils. He couldn't speak. He just turned his head, searching. Where was Eli? Still alive, one of the medics said. Then Jackson passed out. Jackson drifted in and out of consciousness, each return marked by a white ceiling and the soft chime of medical monitors. A dull ache radiated from his left shoulder into his ribs. Something was wrong with his hip. His throat burned as if he'd swallowed sandpaper. Breathing hurt. Voices murmured around him, sometimes human, sometimes Laquari. He caught fragments: torn muscle, blood loss, multiple strains, oxygen saturation low. Someone pressed something cool to his neck. A soft hiss followed. He slipped back under. It was evening ship time when he finally stabilized enough to sit up with assistance. The medbay was built into the orbiting science vessel Daedalus Reach, tethered just above Thalos 9. The artificial gravity here felt light, mockingly so after the crushing pull of the moon. His brother was 10 feet away, in a sealed recovery pod. A thin blanket covered most of Eli's body, but Jackson could see bruising along his neck and shoulder. His arm was immobilized, and his leg was rigged in suspension. A Laquari physician named Trell adjusted a scanner beside Jackson's bed. You tore 2 major muscle groups in your back and ruptured a bicep tendon. Your left scapula is cracked and your right hip sustained blunt trauma. But there was no spinal damage. You're lucky. Jackson didn't feel lucky. He felt like someone had beat him with a steel pipe and then let a tram run over his pelvis. Eli? He rasped. Trell didn't answer immediately. He's stable. He had a collapsed lung, several broken ribs, and a compound femur fracture, but the bleeding's controlled. He'll need weeks of immobilization, followed by therapy. Consciousness hasn't returned yet, but brain activity is within safe range. Jackson nodded once. That was enough for now. 2 days passed. Jackson was moved from full bed rest to a semi-sitting position with a mobility brace. The Laquari had adapted some of their tech for human musculature, but even so, every shift sent jolts through his ribs and hip. The alien who'd declared Eli dead visited on the 3rd day. Vorel approached cautiously, hands clasped, eyes low. Jackson narrowed his eyes. The painkillers dulled the edges of his anger, but not by much. I was wrong, Vorel said simply. Jackson didn't respond. I had no detectable readings. Your brother's suit vitals were offline. No breath movement. It was not neglect. It was error. Jackson's gaze didn't soften. You gave up in less than 10 seconds. Vorel inclined his head. I did. I was taught certainty in field trauma triage. That certainty failed me. After a long silence, Jackson exhaled. You still got him out, Vorel added quietly. You lifted that beam. I have reviewed the mass logs. That object weighed 512 kilograms. Under Thalos gravity, your effective lift was over 800 kilograms. That is biologically impossible for your species. I don't remember most of it, Jackson admitted. My body just did what it had to. Vor glanced at the monitors. That is what troubles us. Later that day, Jackson was approached again, this time by a delegation. 3 Laquari scientists, 2 human neurologists, and 1 military observer from EarthGov. They filed into the medbay like a polite wave of anxiety. Mr. Avery, one of the human doctors said, we'd like your consent to run some tests. Jackson's eyes narrowed. What kind of tests? Neuromuscular response, adrenaline thresholds, stress simulations? A Laquari scientist answered. Your lift triggered a physiological event we've never observed before in your kind. If we can understand the parameters— I'm not a lab rat, Jackson snapped. No, of course not, the EarthGov observer said smoothly. But this could change our understanding of human capability. You were not wearing exosupport, yet you outperformed projected human limits by more than threefold. If emotional stimuli can bypass normal muscular failure thresholds— Jackson held up a hand. You're asking if love made me a temporary Superman? The Laquari scientists shifted uncomfortably. One of them finally said, yes, that is precisely what we are asking. They ran the tests. Over the next week, Jackson was moved to a mobile rehabilitation chamber where his body could heal under light gravitational modulation. Electrodes were placed along his spine, shoulders, and thighs. He underwent controlled stress simulations, light anxiety first, then increasing emotional provocation. Nothing came close to replicating the strength from the beam incident. Jackson jerked upright so fast he re-aggravated his shoulder. Still, the lift strength was never reproduced. On day 9, while Jackson struggled through a session of assisted walking, Trell returned with a datapad. Patrick's form oddly increased. Day 9, probe, find, fall, tact 2 to 570. From middle distance high descent, May 1st descent. Trell returned, so fast he re-aggravated his shoulder. Jackson jerked upright so fast he reproduced the lift from middle distance high descent. Military language says 2, 4, 5, 7, 0. Jackson jerked upright so fast he reproduced the lift. From military language says 2, 4, 5, 7. There's growing concern, he said, among the Laquari Council. If human emotion can override physical limits, if it's not constrained by logic or predictability, it poses implications. Jackson looked up. Implications? For alliances, for future conflict, for coexistence. You think we're unstable? Trell hesitated. We think you are dangerous when desperate? And desperation seems common among your kind? Jackson leaned against the rail. That desperation's why my brother's still alive. Trell nodded. We know. That's what makes it so complicated. At last, 2 weeks after the incident, Eli woke up. Jackson was there, sitting stiffly in a zero-G chair, arms still strapped in a support harness. Eli's eyes fluttered open, and for a terrifying second he just stared. Then he coughed a wet, raspy thing and whispered, "That was the dumbest thing you've ever done." Jackson laughed so hard it sent a bolt of pain through his chest. "You idiot," he said, voice thick. "You weren't breathing." "I was." Eli turned his head slowly. "Barely. I heard Vorel. I heard you scream my name. I just couldn't move." Jackson blinked. "You were awake?" Eli nodded. "Why didn't you say something? Because if I had, you would have stopped. You would have hesitated. I knew you'd find a way." Jackson sat back, stunned. "You felt all of it?" he asked quietly. "Every damned second? The pressure? The pain? My femur cracked like a dry twig. I felt my lung collapse. But I also felt you, grabbing me, lifting, pulling. Pulling." Jackson swallowed hard. "You could have died." "I knew I wouldn't," Eli said. "Not with you there." For once, Jackson had no comeback. They sat in silence, monitors beeping softly around them. Later that evening, Jackson declined another round of tests. When asked why, he simply said, "Because this wasn't about biology. It was about knowing I had one shot and I wasn't going to let my brother die." The aliens didn't know what to do with that answer, but for the first time, they began to understand. By the third week, Eli had taken his first painful steps using a support walker, while Jackson could manage short distances without bracing. Neither brother moved with ease, but they moved. The medical wing aboard Daedalus Reach was now more familiar than any home either of them had known on Earth. Recovery was slow, as expected. Jackson's right shoulder had to be kept partially immobilized to let the soft tissues reattach and stabilize. Eli's femur had been reconstructed with a titanium implant and required weeks before it could bear any weight. The fractured ribs and collapsed lung meant his breathing came in shallow pulls, and coughing still brought tears to his eyes. Still, they found time to talk, laugh, argue, and to quietly piece together what had happened underground. The Laquari weren't letting it go. An entire delegation from the Laquari High Inquiry Division arrived aboard the vessel by the end of week 4. Word had spread, not just about the beam or the survival, but about what Jackson had done under impossible conditions. And the questions became heavier. They no longer asked Jackson for tests. They asked humans, all humans. Sleep studies, psychological breakdowns, historic cases of emergency feats. EarthGov specialists supplied case files, the mother lifting a car to save her child, the soldier dragging 3 men from a burning tank while half blind, the diver holding breath beyond training limits to save someone else. Most were previously explained as anomalies or misreported. Now, the Laquari treated them as data points. "Your bodies resist logic," said one Laquari analyst. "They obey the mind's illusion when under threat. That is not safe. Not for others. Not for yourselves." Jackson frowned. "We don't do it by choice. It's not like flipping a switch." "And yet the switch exists," the analyst replied. That evening, the 2 brothers shared a quiet meal in the communal observation deck, Earth visible as a faint blue speck through the viewport. "They're scared of us," Eli said, chewing slowly. "Not us. What we might do if pushed," Jackson replied. Eli leaned back, rubbing his ribs. "To be fair, we scare ourselves sometimes." Jackson chuckled softly. "Yeah, I wasn't built to lift a truck. Definitely not with my shoulder like this." They fell into silence again, watching a tiny asteroid tumble past. Later that week, Voral returned with an unexpected request. "There will be a demonstration," he said. "Our council seeks context. They wish to see how a typical human handles emergency stress. Not another lift. A controlled event." "Simulated danger," Jackson said flatly. "Yes. Supervised. Deceptive in appearance but safe in execution." Jackson looked at Eli. The younger Avery just shook his head. "No," Jackson said. Voral tilted his head. "It would be educational. You want to recreate trauma to test our unpredictability? That's not education. That's theater." Voral left without arguing, but the conversation stuck. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Jackson was woken early by Dr. Corrine Lewis, one of the EarthGov trauma physicians assigned to the expedition. She looked grim. "2 Laquari are in quarantine. Early signs of a respiratory pathogen. May not be contagious to us, but protocols are in effect." He sat up. "From Talos?" "Possibly. Spore traces found on their outer gear. Within hours, movement aboard Daedalus Reach was limited. Biofilters kicked into high flow, and all personnel were required to wear masks outside the med bay. The Laquari quarantined half of their science division. A temporary calm settled in, but beneath it tension brewed. 3 days later, another Laquari fell ill. He wasn't responding to standard immune therapy. That's when things began to unravel. The Laquari were fastidious about hygiene. Their immune systems weren't built for the microbial chaos humans handled daily. To them, one pathogen, unaccounted for, could wipe out a whole research unit. As pressure mounted, whispers started in the halls, fear that humans had brought something they hadn't detected, or that Thalos 9's exposure had compromised their biochemistry. And more than once, Jackson heard phrases like, "They don't even understand their own biology." Eli caught it too. "It's turning," he said quietly one night, "from curiosity to suspicion." "They think we're a wild card," Jackson said. "Maybe we are. Then came the incident. A minor systems fire broke out in the lower hydroponics bay. An overheating circuit started it, routine. But smoke entered the ventilation faster than predicted. 2 Liquari were trapped behind a jammed door. They panicked. Both were delicate, slender-framed researchers. One collapsed within minutes due to smoke inhalation. Jackson and Eli were already en route with a maintenance tech when the alarm hit their wing. Jackson barely managed the emergency override, while Eli, dragging his uncooperative leg, used a pry bar to wedge the door enough for one of the trapped Liquari to crawl through. The second was unconscious. Jackson went in. The air was thick, burning his lungs, but he slung the smaller body over his back and staggered out. His shoulder felt like it was being torn off, and the weight nearly folded him, but he got them clear. Medics arrived minutes later. Later, in the med bay, as Jackson's oxygen levels were stabilized and Eli's leg re-iced, a senior Liquari named Rallin came to see them. "I owe you a debt," he said. "You risked yourselves again, despite everything." Jackson blinked. "What everything?" Rallin hesitated, then admitted, "The fear, the rumors, that you are too unpredictable, that you act before thinking, that your strength is a byproduct of lack of control." Jackson snorted. "That wasn't lack of control. That was the decision to help someone in danger." "And that terrifies us," Rallin said gently, "because it means your species is not bound by self-preservation. You prioritize others even at cost to yourself. You sacrifice reflexively." Eli spoke up from his bed. "You're scared of compassion?" "We are scared of how powerful it makes you," Rallin replied. That night, Jackson sat alone in the observation deck, a brace on his shoulder again, his breathing shallow from the smoke exposure. He thought about what Rallin had said, about the way they saw humanity now not just as emotional or irrational, but as beings whose instincts didn't align with their understanding of risk. He remembered the weight of that beam, the way his muscles had screamed, the silence afterward, and Eli's breath returning like a miracle. It hadn't been control, but it hadn't been chaos either. It had been choice. Made in a moment that defied calculation. The quarantine protocols lifted 10 days later. The respiratory pathogen had been mapped, isolated, and deemed harmless to humans, but mildly virulent among the Liquari. 3 of their scientists would need extended immunotherapy but were no longer in danger. The situation stabilized. But the tension had not fully faded. Liquari and human teams continued to interact, but something beneath the surface had changed. Observers spoke in hushed voices. Research projects previously shared across species were now quietly redirected. Trust hadn't broken, but it had bent, and bending had consequences. Jackson noticed it in the way Liquari researchers took a fraction longer to reply to his questions. Eli noticed it in how no one sat near them during communal meals anymore. "I don't blame them," Eli said one morning, adjusting the leg brace that still creaked when he stood. "They think we're unpredictable." "We are," Jackson replied, grunting as he stretched the shoulder he'd nearly destroyed. "But they think unpredictable means dangerous." "Sometimes it does." They were interrupted by a call from Dr. Lewis. The council had requested one final meeting with both brothers. They arrived at the main chamber slowly. Neither of them moved smoothly, but together they managed. The Liquari High Inquiry panel waited inside, seated behind a crystalline interface that shimmered faintly. Vore, surprisingly, stood with the panel. "Jackson." "Avery," the speaker began. "And Eli Avery. We have spent weeks evaluating the implications of your actions and the conditions surrounding them. We recognize that your brother would not have survived without your intervention. We acknowledge the skill, loyalty, and force of will displayed." Jackson said nothing. The speaker continued. "We also recognize that such force of will defies measurable boundaries. That your biology, when fused with emotion, acts beyond predictable function, and that terrifies us. Eli shifted his weight carefully. So what happens now? The expedition program will continue, but joint field operations will be limited for the foreseeable future. Your species is too valuable to exclude, but your instincts, though noble, can destabilize cooperative missions. So we're a liability, Jackson said. A potential one, Vora replied. One we cannot ignore. We fear what happens when a human chooses to help without calculating the risk, because you do not stop. You do not yield, even when logic demands it. Jackson took a breath and leaned slightly on his cane. You're right. We don't always stop. Sometimes that's a problem. Sometimes it's why someone else makes it out alive. The room was silent. You say you're afraid of what that means, he added. But have you considered what it says about us? Eli stepped forward. We don't lift beams because we want to. We don't run into fires because it's thrilling. We do it because someone we care about is in danger. That instinct, you call it unpredictable, but it's not chaos. It's love. It's fear. It's the refusal to accept death when we believe we can stop it. Even at your own expense? Jackson nodded, especially then. The panel dismissed them without further question. That night, Jackson returned to the medbay and found a small envelope on his bed. It was old-fashioned, out of place among sterile diagnostics and digital records. Inside was a folded slip of paper. We fear you because you value others above yourselves, but perhaps that is also your strength. Vorel Jackson folded the note and tucked it into his bag without a word. 3 weeks later, EarthGov began redeployment rotation. The Avery brothers were scheduled for return transport, along with other mission personnel. Their injuries had stabilized, and while full recovery would take months, maybe a year, for Eli's leg, they were cleared for departure. Their final walk through the Daedalus Reach corridors was slower than their arrival. They passed quiet stations, nodded to familiar faces. Some looked away, others gave brief, respectful salutes. Just before boarding, a young Laquari technician approached. He looked nervous. I studied your lift incident, he said to Jackson, holding out a data chip. I modeled it in Grav Physics Sim. Still doesn't make sense. Jackson gave a faint smile. That's the thing about us. Sometimes, neither does the reason. The technician blinked. How? Jackson took the chip and looked the alien squarely in the eyes. We don't think about it, we just act. That's what humans do when it matters. He boarded without another word. The journey home took several days. The brothers shared a cabin, each wrapped in their own thoughts. Jackson spent most of the time reviewing his medical charts, trying to understand which parts of him would heal fully and which wouldn't. Eli mapped out rehab plans, already tinkering with ways to adjust his walking pattern around the fused femur. One night, Eli asked, "If it happened again, would you still go under that beam?" Jackson stared at the ceiling. Every time. You sure? Knowing what it did to your body? Yeah. Eli nodded once. That's what scares them, you know. I know. Neither of them spoke for a while. When Earth's orbit grew large in the viewport, Jackson leaned forward. Home wasn't the same anymore. He knew that. The body he had left with wasn't the one returning. The galaxy now saw his kind differently, and maybe rightly so. But he also knew something else. When the moment came, and everything was stacked against them, humanity didn't freeze. It didn't retreat. It didn't calculate odds. It moved. It lifted. It survived. Not out of superiority, not from madness, but because someone they loved needed them, and they would do it again, because that's what humans do. The pod shuddered softly as the atmospheric re-entry began. Behind them, Thalos 9 rotated in silence, its crystal veins glinting faintly in the void. Ahead of them, Earth waited, whole, complicated, beautiful. Home.